There's a chill in the air. The chill of feeling forgotten. The chill of being tossed away with the other toys no one wants to play with anymore. After all, why sit inside playing alone when you could play with your friends? What's been forgotten, you ask? Why, dear viewer, stealth gamers have been forgotten. Not by everyone, no. Will never truly be forgotten. But as the turntables turn and the world looks on a new day, it's rare to see a real stealth game on that dark horizon. Hey guys, it's Ken. I love stealth games. They tap into something primal within me. I played so many of them from such a young age that I can't tell you which one I played first, but they all hold a special place in my heart. The last 15 years have been hard for me, because while I love fast-paced action games too, stealth games are the wife waiting at home, but I can't seem to find the new house she's moved us into. As a kid, I used to stealth around everywhere. I never wanted anyone to know I was around because when they thought they were alone, I could listen in and learn. See who people truly were. I learned the effect different surfaces had on different shoes, and I could tell people apart by the sound of their footsteps. I wore black to blend in with the night and actually made a pair of leather moccasins that were terribly stitched but did the job. Stealth games felt like who I was. Not a thief, but just someone who moves freely and uses their wits to get to the perfect place. And really that's what stealth is. It's knowledge and resourcefulness. Learning how to put out candles from a distance and keeping track of who's in the area. Utilizing the tools you can carry on you or find as you go, knowing there's no resupply without access to the area beforehand. But you're ready for that, right? Because almost any good entry requires knowledge of the site. I have a story to tell you. A friend of mine and I once snuck into a warehouse at about 3 a.m. We were both losers back in our hood rat era where we could drive and didn't really think we could die. So we put the idea together to sneak in somewhere and pick this tiny little warehouse downtownish. There were 2 guards, 1 patrol and 1 stationary, and we thought we could outwit them. We really thought we could outwit them. We staked it out twice. Once a week before so we could learn the layout for that day of the week, and a second time 2 days before to confirm any changes. Both nights we noticed that the guards were pretty lazy, with the patrol guard hanging around the desk and sometimes checking outside, fairly randomly. We never saw if the desk guard had any cameras, but he was on his phone most of the time anyway, and we never saw any cameras posted around the building, so he was likely just there to accompany the patrol should anything occur. I actually worked as a security guard for a short time, and it is pretty common to have 2. The front door could be seen by both of them, and there was a back door the desk guard would take smoke breaks at, back when security guards earning $18 an hour could afford cigarettes. And that's the important part there, okay? Lazy guard taking smoke breaks. And I'll finish this story later on, but for now, we need to talk about stealth games. Doug Church of Looking Glass once said, "The basic stealth model was having the guard look the other way and you going past pretty quickly." And at its core, a stealth game is basically that. Instead of fighting everything between you and the goal, you have to try not to fight everything, which is the exact opposite of most games, right? The primary mechanic is visual sight, where as long as enemies can't see you, you don't really exist. Sound is extremely common as well, bringing in the idea that various surfaces create different sounds and levels of sound, making you plan around not just where the enemies are and where they're looking, but also what path you're going to take when you're not being watched. With Thief in 1998, we saw the introduction of lighting levels, which added an extra dimension to the visual detection system by letting dynamic changes alter the visual landscape of where you could and could not travel. So you could extinguish torches, hide in corners, and had to realize that the darkness wasn't a static shield that would block guards, as when guards knew you were nearby, they would step further into the darkness and look for you. When you do interact with guards outside of avoiding them, there's usually an essence of non-violence through means of peaceful knockout, but just as commonly is a silent kill method. You then have to hide the body, which can reveal your existence if the body can be found by them. Games like Splinter Cell let you interrogate guards to learn more about the area, and games like Hitman took a more hide-in-plain-sight approach. Gadgets or utilities are practically a necessity for a stealth game, with things like water arrows or smoke bombs helping you to avoid detection and return to stealth if you're discovered. As the genre has developed, more, let's call them quality of life additions have appeared, despite many of us not wanting them. Things like marking enemies so you can track them through walls, or giving you a very clear indication of who can see you and how aware of you they are using a non-immersive detection meter. But stealth games at their core are an immersion of you as a lone infiltrator, slipping into a living world and using your wits and supplies to stay one step ahead of the guards to steal the gold or kill a target. Greg LaPiccolo, also of Looking Glass, said, "Essentially we're building a type of simulator, where object interactions are correct and physics are tied in correctly." And that's the important part of a stealth game. When the world doesn't feel real, it gets boring. When it feels too real, it gets too difficult. Stealth games require simulation of a micro-world, with all the fear and bravado that goes into the work of an actual pennyweight. A world where you can get a beat on what everyone is doing, but you don't know if they'll surprise you. Because at the cross between planning and surprise is opportunity. And it's opportunity that makes the thief. While not the first stealth games, the genre really popped into existence in 1998 with the release of the Stealth Trio: Tenchu, Stealth Assassins, Metal Gear Solid, and Thief, The Dark Project. Note that Thief is the only one of these not made by the Japanese, and that's a very important point I'll come back to later. These games established stealth in 3D, but they also established the spectrum of feeling and design that stealth games are following to this day. In Tenchu, you find yourself utilizing corners and sticking heavily to the rooftops. You don't know much about the area beforehand, but you know enough to keep you from walking into disaster. It's faster, but with just as little chaos as the other two, pushing you to train your skills until they're second nature and take a reactive approach to what may show up. Combat is expected at points, but to try and fight everyone is a warrior's approach, and you're more of an infiltrator. Your katana, shurikens, and grappling hooks see you traversing various height levels and engaging from different angles. Movement is supposed to happen in two forms: fast traversal when outside and slow traversal when inside. The outside contains less dangerous elements and less complex designs to encourage that fast traversal, whereas insides are split into open areas meant for clear engagements and grid-light hallways meant for staggered focus progression around guards. In Metal Gear Solid, you're given a much more fleshed out story, as expected from Kojima, with many points of the stealth experience being interrupted by those story elements, such as occasional long cutscenes or boss battles or just talking on the radio. You have weapons, mainly your pistol, which support a silencer, but that silencer breaks after only a few shots, meaning that non-violent takedowns, or no takedowns at all, are encouraged. Stealth is a slow process, but there are many points that can be done faster. Engagements are designed to either take out practically everyone, or no one at all. Should you be discovered, you can usually recover by either returning to stealth or defeating the enemies, but this can be difficult to do. Thief is a slow game. Your fastest movement speed is still too slow to run away, really. And while you can cheese it thanks to the intense crunch time, studio disaster, and the shrink of an outrageously large original design, the fastest you're really meant to play it is still pretty slow. Outside of certain levels, you're really not meant to engage anyone. You're meant to get in and out without anyone knowing you were there. Almost definitely inspired by our modern presentation of thieves rooting back to books like The Gentleman Thief by E.W. Hornung, you're meant to stick to the shadows, listen to what's being said, gather items, and learn the area. You are given a rough map of many levels before you start, which helps guide your entry and narrow in your search, but there's a sense of having to understand the faction behind an area to understand the architecture once you're inside. Yet for their differences, all three of these establish two core ideas that I consider to be the real core of a stealth game. 1. When stealth is broken, you have a very limited window to react and recover. And at their best, this window is taken to the extreme and you have practically no window to recover. 2. You are encouraged to fail. The path is open for you to complete a zone in the first try, but you are encouraged to fail over and over because as you reach a new failure point, the entire progression up to that failure point can be done faster due to the knowledge gained during that failure. And this second point isn't unique to stealth games, right? But it is practically required for a stealth game. Just like FPS games are canonically meant to be a single progression of masterful technique, stealth games are meant for you to fail over and over until you finish the game in the canonical way, where you did everything perfect. We can see these core ideas play out in yet another 1998 game which also falls under this umbrella, Commandos Behind Enemy Lines. Where Tenchu and Metal Gear Solid maintained a third-person camera and Thief was the first to use first-person, Commandos was a real-time strategy game, adding an extra sense of tactics to the gameplay by increasing your visibility yet also increasing the number of infiltrating units. It's a brutal game, and even if one of your units gets detected, you've failed the whole thing. And I could list loads of stealth games between 1998 and 2005 that blew people away with their difficulty, immersive environments, and complicated stories, and a serious need for commitment to playing them. Even Rockstar made a stealth game. That's how popular these were. But to understand why this popularity occurred, we need to look at 1998. So for console players, it's likely that the first time they tasted online multiplayer was 2000 for Dreamcast owners or 2001-ish for Xbox and PS2 owners. For PC players, it might have been the early 80s if you could afford timeshare, but more likely the first time they sat at home and spent long hours playing games online was the early to mid-90s. While console adapters existed before 2000, they weren't very available or popular or affordable. So for the mass market, we're looking at about 2000. So if you wanted to spend your time gaming with others before 2000, you had to have them sitting next to you, whether that was at home or in an arcade or wherever. And 1998 was no exception. Take a look at the Game of the Year awards for 1998. All single-player titles aside from Psychic Force, a fighting game. And if you go investigate yourself for all games released in 1998, most of them are single-player titles. Some of them included couch co-op for their single-player experience, but many were meant for one person to sit down and play. This means that when developing the stealth genre, there was no thought in the back of anyone's head as to how to work other people into it. And when thinking about if people would commit time to playing games that require time commitment, like stealth games, that question wasn't really asked. That's how games were played back then. But earlier I mentioned the stealth trio, right? Tenchu, Metal Gear Solid, and Thief. And I mentioned that Tenchu and Metal Gear Solid are both Japanese games, by Acquire and Kojima respectively, with Thief being a Looking Glass game. But games are games, right? What does Japan have that Western developers don't? Well, Japan has a unique history with silence. In the West, we tend to find silence awkward. It takes time for us to be okay with silence, to the point where we get so worried about the silence in the room that we have to break it. We have to talk. We have to do something that makes noise and fills the void. The history of silence in English roots back to Latin and Gothic, where the terms derive from the idea of interruption, a break in a set of occurrences. Silence is not the norm. But in Japanese, it derives from returning to the natural state, the calming of what has interrupted the norm. I won't pretend to understand the full place silence occupies in Japanese culture, but it's quite different from ours. And the most important difference in the modern day, as it relates to stealth games, is the idea that your full senses can only be activated in a state of complete calm and silence. Additionally, that silence is an ultimate form of bond between two individuals, with the Japanese expecting a close relationship to be exhibited not by words, but non-verbally, in silence. In stealth games, silence is king. It's everywhere. If your character was constantly making noise, they wouldn't be hidden for very long. And it's this silence which activates your sensitivity to hearing everything going on around you. A ripple in a river goes unnoticed, but a ripple in a pond is seen by all. But it's not just hearing that gets enhanced, it's your vision as well. The focus brought on by the silence makes you hyper aware of what you can see, as it's the only constant. Your thoughts are clearly defined on the task at hand, and some nights, playing Metal Gear in the dark, I swear I can feel the grass rubbing against my abdomen as I crawl through. Smell the torches fizzling out in Thief. Taste the healing draft in Tenchu. And yet Thief is the odd one out here. Most of the game is played with practically no music. You have an odd set of sounds being played as an underlying tone, but you're drenched in silence. Meanwhile, Tenchu has a renowned soundtrack, and both it and Metal Gear use silence for emphasis and tension, but not as a constant environment. Despite this, if you asked me what it sounded like to crawl through Metal Gear, I'd have described it the same as Thief. Not because the music is bad, but because it's done perfectly. It's there, but it blends in to assist in immersion and creates a base layer that itself acts as silence. Tenchu is full of bombastic tracks that sound like almost nothing before it, and this was clearly intentional, as the restrictions of the PS1 forced them to use a very short view distance, so using music the way they did, with higher tempos and more sounds, led to you moving faster and thinking quicker, and acting more like the portrayal of the skills we've come to encompass as ninjutsu, similar to what's shown in Azumi, to reference a popular ninja manga of the time. Yet in Tenchu 2, suddenly that loud, fast-paced soundtrack is pretty much gone. They made the deliberate choice to take the Thief approach and have basically no music for most of the game. And it brings with it a slower game, a more deliberate game, one that feels more like Thief or Metal Gear Solid. And they weren't wrong to use silence how they did in the original game, but I highlight this because the stealth trio reveals how the use of silence plays on the type of stealth a game is pushing a user to play. Thief with almost no music is a slow, patient game. Metal Gear Solid, with its backing layer and very strategic use of music, is a reactive game, keeping you changing up as the enemies do. And Tenchu, with its use of hi-hat laden jams, is a fast-paced, driven stealth game. But to me, the major crack in the sound design methodology of Thief is that their approach was the obvious approach. It was the Western approach, really. Thief wants you to feel uncomfortable. It wants you to feel like there's danger around every corner. And it wants you to train yourself to be so good at being a thief that you knock that fear right out of you. And though I respect him to the utmost degree, and would absolutely love to have a conversation with the man, I don't care what Eric Brogius says. The soundtrack to Thief did not make sitting in the dark feel comfy. It made it feel so unnerving that you wanted to master every bit of the game so you didn't have to feel that way anymore. Okay, sound rant aside, what does silence in Japan have to do with multiplayer? Easy. Games require you to be looking at a screen. They require you to be focused. They require calm, collected planning and action. They don't leave a lot of room to be both immersed and talking to someone. You can't get the same immersion out of Splinter Cell when you're communicating with your friend over Ventrilo and hearing the constant beep boop of the mic opening and closing. You can have fun, but you can't get the same experience. The only way to do so is to shut off the mics and play silent. But most people don't want that, even a lot of stealth gamers. It's a different, less immersive form of stealth when you're playing with someone else. But as the Japanese know, and anyone with real stealth training knows, silence is where real communication happens. You have to truly understand someone to understand them without words. It's rare I've been able to find someone to play co-op stealth games without chat, but it's an amazing experience as you learn each other. So give it a try. Later, in 2004, the second game in the Splinter Cell series, Pandora Tomorrow, released with a multiplayer mode. It involved two teams, Mercs and Spies, where the Mercs basically played a first-person shooter, and the Spies played a third-person stealth. Both teams needed to navigate using stealth ideas and gadgets in order to win, but the gameplay resembled a search and destroy style where the Spies had objectives to fulfill, and the Mercs just needed to stop them. This was sort of the first multiplayer to try and bring the stealth genre in, and while it made a good attempt, it's a far cry from what stealth games are in single player. And in 2005, they improved on that multiplayer mode with the follow-up game, Chaos Theory, expanding on the use of gadgets and light levels to enhance the ability to hide from other players. I do consider this the peak of stealth multiplayer, but building on their experience with Pandora Tomorrow, the stealth gameplay was a strange mix of rapid advancement when players are searching elsewhere, and extremely long waiting times while players were nearby. To enhance the ability to escape from the Mercs, the maps were very vertical, giving the Spies many ways to escape when discovered and ultimately making a fairly boring game for the Mercs. There was too much map to cover and it was too easy for Spies to escape, so you basically had to patrol around objectives and wait to nab them in the act. This meant that nearly everyone wanted to play Spies, and playing Mercs was just a frustrating attempt to prove you're better at stealth than your friends were. I compare this to modern asymmetric games like Dead by Daylight, where some people prefer playing the killer and others prefer the survivors, but Generally, you know you'll play both fairly regularly and are fine with either. And like I said, Mercs vs. Spies and the other game modes available in Chaos Theory were great, but they weren't stealth in the way we see it in the single player. They weren't stealth as we see the core of the stealth genre. They were too forgiving on the stealth players, and they were too overwhelming in power. People wanted to play the spies because you did more often, creating a constant goal with fairly fast gameplay. But that's not how the single-player campaign played. Sam Fisher was never the one with the upper hand because detection meant major consequences. And so single-player stealth was a much more tense, punishing gameplay loop. When the stealth players are the ones in control, you feel like Batman. But that's not what the stealth trio established. And as I said, it was fun, but the reason it was fun started to show the shift in the industry. See, Xbox Live released in 2002, PlayStation Network in 2006, and by 2010 it was getting more rare to find a single-player game topping the charts on these consoles that didn't have an additional multiplayer mode or at least cooperative online play. Metal Gear Solid 4 in 2008 brought Metal Gear Online. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood brought a multiplayer mode, clearly influenced by Splinter Cells. Far Cry and Last of Us, which were major influences on the modern stealth as an option style, both had shootout multiplayer modes. And 2013's Arkham Origins shoehorned in some very strange multiplayer modes nobody actually wanted. I don't know why they tried to do this, except I'm about to explain it to you. This didn't happen because the multiplayer improved these games, even if they were fun to play. It happened because players started shifting to multiplayer games more and more. Think back to games like Halo, Gears of War, and Killzone, games that were renowned for their stories yet stuck around because of their multiplayer modes. Plenty of people bought these three simply to play the multiplayer with their friends, which wouldn't have happened without it. Games started to add in multiplayer modes in order to take a shot at grabbing that slice of the market, where after players finished the stories, they'd get addicted to the multiplayer and pull others in. And while multiplayer games of all genres have been popular since long before 2010, this mid-2000s era is when gaming shifted from primarily single-player to dominantly multiplayer. Let's continue the story from earlier. So the desk guard, right? Lazy smoker. Living the high life. We're watching him the week before, burner phones in hand, each of us watching different doors, and my buddy gives me the very imaginative signal. DG exiting AO through rear entrance. I'm watching the patrol put his feet up for a minute, listening in like only a 17-year-old can with excitement and anxiety during this extremely boring situation. Cigarette, he says. Silence for minutes. The non-existent tension builds. Breathing from both ends of the call. Dude, he says. What? Dude, he says again, chuckling to himself. The door isn't locked. And we both laughed, quietly. Before we left that night, I made sure both guards were at the front, and I joined him at the back. He tried to open the door, it opened, and we ran off into the night. Same routine, different patrol guard 5 days later. No change in the plan. D-Day arrives. We're parked in a garage about 8 blocks away, and we've got it timed perfectly. As soon as we show up at the front, the desk guard is getting up. Same two from a week before. Patrol guard puts his feet up, we head around back. Desk guard is already lit up, standing in the light of the cheap white lamp that shows the way. He takes one last puff, tosses the butt, and walks back inside. So we gave it a 10 count, tried the door, and stepped inside. And our experience inside revealed something crucial about how stealth works with another person. The silent, nonverbal communication, the heightened awareness, the shared risk. But we'll get to that. Let's see where the industry has gone since 2010. By 2015, the industry had completed its shift. The market economics were undeniable. Publishers had confirmed that multiplayer titles generated significantly more revenue over longer periods than even the most critically acclaimed single-player experiences. Games like Call of Duty and Fortnite weren't just selling copies, they were selling battle passes, cosmetics, and ongoing engagement, for a fraction of the development cost over the lifespan of a game. Meanwhile, a perfectly crafted stealth title might sell well initially, but offer limited opportunities for recurring revenue. What can you really do with a stealth game? The financial realities began dictating design decisions. Stealth mechanics survived, but true stealth games dwindled away. Even franchises with stealth at their core began to compromise. Assassin's Creed evolved from stealth-oriented experience to an action RPG. Metal Gear Solid 5 introduced more forgiving stealth aspects and more options for open engagement. Hitman adopted a games-as-a-service model with rotating content, constantly trying various multiplayer modes that never really got the stealth core down. Splinter Cell effectively disappeared, and might be on the horizon. Games like Sekiro, which was originally supposed to be a Tenchu game, made stealth completely optional almost the entire time. The mechanics that define true stealth, limited recovery windows, harsh consequences for detection, methodical pacing, these were fundamentally incompatible with the accessibility demands of mainstream multiplayer experiences and the mass market desire of major single-player games. Modern games couldn't risk frustrating players who might otherwise spend money on extra content or microtransactions. Stealth games still appeared, of course. Dishonored in 2012, a bit of a watered-down Thief remake, Styx, and Origami. Some great games. And there were a few attempts at multiplayer stealth, like Payday and Monaco, but they never really captured the core of a stealth game, instead giving you options for other forms of engagement or leaning into the humorous aspects that came from trying to coordinate with your friends. And these aren't bad to do, but they weren't core stealth games. The message in the industry seemed to be clear. Stealth as a core gameplay pillar was considered too niche, too demanding, too slow for an industry increasingly dominated by accessible multiplayer experiences. Kids aren't looking for Tenchu, they're looking for Fortnite. And adults have so little time to play games that they're either working through a AAA title 1 hour at a time, or just want to settle into something competitive so they can play with their friends. Too much of the market is looking for fast-paced multiplayer, and game development costs are too high for big studios to really take a gamble on a game with stealth at its core that doesn't already have an audience behind it. For so long, it's been much safer to appeal to the multiplayer market or the action crowd and fit stealth elements in here and there. And things are changing, but are they changing enough to make a stealth game worth making? Publishers weren't wrong about what would make money. The rise of live service revenue models created a gaming landscape where the meditation of stealth, the silence, the patience, the deliberate pacing, became increasingly rare. The very things that made stealth games special made them poor candidates for the dominant business models of modern gaming. For the dedicated stealth enthusiasts like me, this meant watching a beloved genre gradually transform into something unrecognizable, with stealth mechanics becoming increasingly optional flourishes in action games rather than the foundational pillar that rocked the industry 27 years ago. But money alone isn't the only thing in play here. See, during the first decade of YouTube, stealth games actually saw a lot of coverage. Not to say that they're unpopular now, but it was a different world. They were games that people wanted Let's Plays made for, because as long as you fell at either the very good or very bad end of the spectrum, your gameplay would be interesting to watch. They were games that took time and could take weeks for someone to watch all of. They gave the creator room to breathe and talk as they were navigating through an engagement. They could talk about the progress, the world, why they failed, what they've learned, or just tell a story as they wait for guards to pass. And maybe it's the change in attention spans or the culture or just a shift in how people make content, but at the top level that space is nearly gone now. The popular content is faster and more humor-focused, and long-form coverage of slower games is much more niche. Not only are content creators leaning that way, but clearly gamers are too. Despite audiences screaming about their love for single-player games, those aren't the games that reach massive success on a regular basis. You look at the top categories on Twitch, what are they? And don't start citing specific games, alright? We're talking about market trends. Over the last couple months, I've pushed both Kazan and Expedition 33, two extremely successful AA games that are entirely single-player and do have a slowness to them. But when you zoom out from the success stories, you see the trends. And the biggest trend factor is that in terms of longevity and profit, Multiplayer games see a much higher return in middle-tier budgets when they can grab even a mediocre slice of the greater market base. And a game with a larger slice of the market base is not only played by more people, but it is watched by more people. And really the long-term future of deep single-player gaming is shaping up to be in this strange AA development range. Indies are amazing, of course, but their low-risk, low-budget approach means that the scale of a game like Splinter Cell, in terms of modern-day scope, is difficult for them to reach and even harder for them to succeed on. This point is hugely out of scope and will be covered in its own video, but as we walk down this weary road of modern gaming, the AA space is starting to die out, and yet, contradictingly, also seeing a strange resurgence? I don't know. I'll figure it out. While a Splinter Cell remake may or may not be in the pipeline at Ubisoft, stealth games are exactly what the AA market is made for. Appealing to niche audiences while innovating in a way that brings in not only the streamers for that niche audience, but also larger streamers looking for something interesting that they can't find in the AAA space. Something that lets them express their intrigue and gives them space to breathe and talk while still keeping the audience engaged with the gameplay. I have so many ideas for this, but the reality is that making a stealth game these days is a huge gamble. But a AA studio is exactly the type of studio that could do it right and add something special to it. And while I do think streaming and the modern streaming audience have hurt the stealth genre's broad appeal, I also think they are exactly what might revitalize it in the next coming years. We have the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake coming in August. Sleight of hand looks like it'll push boundaries in the indie scene. The Splinter Cell remake rumors made a big splash, and just in April we saw a Commander's reboot. All of these have made noise in the streaming realm, and though they'll all find different levels of reception, I can see the stealth genre limping its way back into the light, not just from developers and publishers, but from streamers and viewers and gamers. Yet the data I'm looking for with all of these releases I mentioned isn't really player numbers or sales numbers, though those are hugely important, it's viewer numbers. I want to see that the game developers can bring something to this genre that keeps viewers watching the same way multiplayer games can, the same way action games can, because if the game itself can keep viewers engaged, then the genre will keep streamers engaged, and the cycle will start to fuel itself. Yet with everything I've told you so far, make it known that stealth games survive. New stealth indie games are being made here and there, but most commonly stealth exists as an optional method in many action games, which I do appreciate, and I understand the changing market. Games are a business as much as they're an art, and there are doubtless studios out there that want to make stealth games and just can't afford the risk. But there's one place stealth truly survives, and unfortunately it's a genre I tend to stay away from because it takes the dread I feel staying hidden in Thief to another level. Horror games. For a very long time, horror games have embodied the idea of having no way to fight back. You have to explore and discover without fighting. Games like Clock Tower and Haunting Ground are great early examples of this, but there wasn't really a stealth aspect. Games like Forbidden Siren especially knew how to use the Metal Gear style of silence to enhance your immersion. But while there was an aspect of hiding to survive in these games, I'd be hard-pressed to call them stealth games. But starting with the Penumbra series by Frictional Games and their genre-setting summation of the ideas they developed in that series, 2010's Amnesia: The Dark Descent is really where I started to notice the overlap between the horror ideas that made my skin crawl and the stealth ideas that kept my mind working. See, in a Skype call in 2010, I was forced to play Amnesia for a couple hours, and though I've never finished it, nor any other game of its kind since it released, I recognized quickly that I could reduce many aspects of the horror elements by utilizing my stealth experience. Light levels from Thief, yet also inverted to force you back into the light. Movement and collision sounds that alarm the monster. The ability to hide in designated spots as a temporary reprieve. And the need for the use of items and map knowledge to plan your routes. And while people were already decrying the dying out of the stealth genre as a central game design, Amnesia snuck past by being advertised not as a stealth game, but as a horror game. And why do horror games work better in our modern landscape where stealth games don't? Fear. Lots of people love being afraid, and people really love watching someone else being afraid. That's why I got pushed to play Amnesia, because it was fun to watch me get scared. Streamers and YouTubers get such a boon from this because to the audience that fear is converted into humor. Playing a stealth game on stream is slow, and so is playing a horror game, but there's no clear transference of constant humor to the audience from a stealth game. And while not a stealth horror game, tons of creators blew up playing Five Nights at Freddy's for this exact reason. It's a slow game that uses silence and darkness to instill tension, leading up to a moment of fear and alarm. Horror survival takes stealth elements to the very boundary of everything I've laid out. A small window to recover, a need for knowledge and planning, limited resources to aid you, and an encouragement to fail over and over until you get it right. And because there is fear innately built into a horror game, adapting it to multiplayer is so much easier to do without losing the original fear of it. Stealth with multiplayer loses its tension, but a horror game with multiplayer stays scary. Games like Repo or Phasmophobia or Dead by Daylight manage to maintain their terrifying essence even with multiple players because the fear factor transcends the coordination. The monsters remain unpredictable and deadly, preserving the core tension that makes horror work. Meanwhile, pure stealth experiences lose their soul when adapted to multiplayer because that sensation of being utterly alone against overwhelming odds is fundamentally compromised when other players join in. And so while I do not play horror games, and I hate that they are the closest thing to the games I want, I am very glad to see them succeed. They are a case study that someone with much more confidence than me needs to break down and see if we can pull the horror elements out, stick even more stealth in, and see if they'll still succeed. But you want to hear the rest of the story, right? Well, we stepped into the warehouse. We were prepped. Soft shoes, dark clothes. We didn't look like burglars, but we blended into the shadows. We had pocket mirrors for inspection and quarters for distraction. We were clinging to the walls of this tiny warehouse, half of its lights on, peeking our mirrors around every corner and crouching behind stacks of boxes. We took our look around, which was all we intended to do. At one point, we got so close to the front door we could hear the guards talking to each other. But like I said, I've never stolen anything really, and I never will. It's not who I am. The challenge for us was the infiltration. But once we were in, we wanted to make note of it somehow. We couldn't just leave. So, as quiet as possible, we slid a dust-covered stack away from the wall to carve "Leave no trace" into the plaster. We slid it back, stealthed our way back to the door, listened intently for footsteps, checked the route back to the front with our mirrors, and slid back outside. Not a word was spoken the entire time, but we knew exactly what the other was trying to say. We walked calmly away, then darted back to the garage. We felt like gods. And here's an important notice that where I grew up, criminal trespassing was a Class C misdemeanor, and as minors would likely just get us a fine since we didn't break the door. And I don't condone trespassing or any other crime, etc., etc. But what did that experience teach me? Well, one, that most crimes are actually pretty simple to commit if you have a couple brain cells to rub together, so buy a gun and get a dog. But also that stealth is an experience that can be enhanced with more people. But somehow we've been gaslit into thinking that stealth games can't without losing their core. And the closest I've gotten to this experience in a game is Payday, which I had to seek out people who actually wanted to stealth instead of just shooting everyone for 20 minutes. Monaco, which is a bit too arcadey for that feeling. And the definite closest were Origami, definitely go play it, and the Splinter Cell co-ops, which were actually pretty great, and I hate Ubisoft. Thanks for watching. Bye!